Welcome to our video series on endangered wildlife conservation. My name is Lane Kirkpatrick. I am a long-term wildlife conservation enthusiast and a career environmentalist. My background includes hosting a local PBS TV program on environmental awareness, and I am very familiar with zoo animals, exhibits, and related conservation programs. So why should we be concerned about Mother Nature and its wildlife inhabitants? Well, we've lost about half of our native wildlife on Earth since the beginning of the century. Not only that, but it is predicted and estimated that we could lose 50% more of what we have left by the end of this century. So that's a major reason for concern. An endangered animal is considered one that has risk of extinction throughout its normal native range. So what we're talking about is their home, where they eat, where they live, where they mate and raise their young. That habitat doesn't really exist and has serious risk of extinction. Why have we had all these dramatic wildlife losses? Well, the major reason has been habitat loss. The loss of their homes, of their ranges, of where they exist. Certainly, there have been many other reasons, including illegal pet trade, invasive species, pollution, exploitation of our land and resources. And over the next 50 years, we expect there's going to be a very dramatic impact upon our wildlife from climate change. So the International Union for the Conservation of Nature tracks the future of our biodiversity and of our animals. And they have a red list of tracking threatened species. And there's 7 categories that they use to track our threatened animals, from least concern all the way through to fully extinct, like the passenger pigeon that no longer exists on Earth. So if we go through these 7 categories, least concern to near threatened, to vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, just like the orangutan was put into that category this last year, extinct in the wild, which means there might be a few in captivity that can be used for recovery programs, and again, all the way to fully extinct. So with that introduction in mind, welcome to our series. Yeah, the topic of our discussion today is herpetology. Herpetology? Actually, it's derived from the Greek word meaning creepy. So we're getting close to Halloween, and really it covers the whole area of reptiles. And today we're going to be focusing on 2 particular classes of reptiles. One are horned lizards, horny toads, as some people say. Here is a picture of one. And doesn't he look pretty vicious? Actually, these guys, horned lizards, only eat insects. And just to show you that they really don't bite, let's go over here and take a look at this picture of a regal horned lizard in somebody's hand. So they're really pretty harmless to people, but they sure do look kind of vicious. There are about 13 different varieties of horned lizards in the United States. And let's look over here at the map. And where you see shades of blue, where the darker blue shades are, there are more varieties than where it's light blue. And as you can see by looking at this, the western United States, in particular the southwest down through Mexico, is the darkest. So that's where you have more varieties of horned lizards than anywhere else. And if we take a look at New Mexico, there are 4 different kinds of horned lizards here. One, we'll come back to this picture, and they're actually found only in the very southwestern tip of New Mexico, pretty much down in that corner where New Mexico touches Mexico and Arizona. It is very prevalent, however, through Arizona and Mexico. The other 3 types of horny lizards, the that I want to talk about are the round-tailed horned lizard and the Texas horned lizard. And if you go from Albuquerque south and east, these would be the prominent types of horned lizards that you might be able to find in New Mexico. Now, if you go from Albuquerque north and west, we have the Hernandez short-horned lizard. And this picture was actually taken in Sandoval County. So sometimes you don't see these unless you're really looking for them, but they're around here. What about their status? They're threatened in Texas, pretty much the Texas horned lizard, primarily because of loss of habitat, the invasion of the fire ants. That has not been good for these guys. A lot of agriculture and pesticides, as well as the pet trade. They like to be collected and resold to people that want to have pets. But in New Mexico, the populations of horned toads are holding up quite well, except around urban areas and in agricultural areas. And part of that, we need to take a look at what they eat. I told you that they pretty much eat insects, and 90% of their diet are harvester ants. So if you even go around Sandoval County, Bernalillo County, and you see these big ants, those are harvester ants. And these lizards will tend to kind of hang around where their food supply is. So there's quite a bit of food for them, and obviously you don't see those harvester ants in the winter. And these lizards also pretty much kind of hibernate throughout the winter month when their food supply is not there. How do these guys defend themselves? They really can't run very fast. If a coyote or a cat or a dog starts chasing them, what do? Well, if you took a look at these pictures, you can see that they know how to camouflage themselves very well. They kind of blend in to the dirt, whatever the material is on the ground. And they can change their colors a little bit to actually be able to camouflage themselves even quite well under most conditions. The other thing that they do, there's actually 4 ways that they protect themselves. The second are the spines that you see on them. If an animal or predator were to eat those spines would more than likely pierce its throat. So it's really a good defense mechanism. And the third is they can actually blow up and inflate themselves to look a little bigger than they are. But the one I really like is that when they get really agitated and they really want to defend themselves, from their eyes they can squirt out this foul-smelling, bloody material that is really a tremendous defense mechanism for these guys. Let's talk about Komodo dragons. Thousands of years ago, some ancient sailors and traders visiting faraway islands in the Indian Ocean, imagine their surprise and horror when they saw reptiles like this, approaching the size of gators. They probably returned home and told tales of monsters that flicked their long forked tongues in and out of drool-dripping nostrils and mouths. These large beasts might have inspired stories of imaginary fire-breathing dragons. But you really don't have to worry. These wild dragons only live on a few isolated islands in Indonesia. So let's take a look at where we find them. And I want to say that they originally developed in Australia. You can see Australia down here, Asia up here. And about 30 million years ago, there was actually land bridges between Australia and Indonesia where these dragons came up to populate the islands that we're going to be talking about today. So if we take a look at this map, this area is blown up, and I hope you can see it, but the islands that are kind of shaded dark are the where you'll find Komodo dragons today. So I said that it was the world's largest lizard. These guys can be approximately 10 feet long and weigh up to 200 pounds. So let's take a look at their habitat a little bit more. in terms of where they live. Beautiful islands with nice white sandy beaches. There are about 6,000 Komodo dragons in the wild, and their population is considered vulnerable. And there's reasons that they've been able to survive as long as they have. Fortunately, dating way back when there were a few humans living on these islands, not too many could live there because it's pretty arid. It's not a good place to support the growing of crops and have tribal villages. So that's one reason that they were able to survive. The other reason, especially since 1910 when they were rediscovered and when they became really known to Indonesia, it's become Komodo National Park. Let's take a look at another graphic here and talk a little bit about some of the characteristics of the Komodo dragon. Well, first of all, these guys can smell meat, animals, whatever is kind of in the air from 5 miles away. So those forked tongues that they have go out and collect scent from the air. They bring the tongues back, and they have two glands on the top of their mouth that analyze what they're smelling. And so their sense of smell is very acute and very important for their survival. They also have pretty good eyesight. They can see 3 times the length of a football field. Their hearing, though, is not so good. And in terms of their ability to get around, they can run at about 13 miles an hour. Well, from my own point of view, I think I can run faster than that. And that's kind of good to know that you could probably outrun these guys if you really had to. But they're also pretty good divers. You notice the ocean in the background. These guys can dive to about 15 feet. And so they also will be patrolling the shorelines looking for anything that really washed up. The other thing is, you can imagine, these guys are at the top of their food chain. There's no predators that they have to worry about. And as this picture shows, they like special nesting places. They in particular like kind of ridges, places where they get the ocean breeze and they can see off in the distance. And they're also like the rest in places where they can ambush prey. One of the things characteristic that you want to note here is that their tails are about as long as the rest of the body. That is a powerful tail. And if they don't like another Komodo dragon, or for any reason there's a need for defense, they can take that tail and swipe and use it as a true defense mechanism. So let's talk a little bit more about what they eat. Meat, dead or alive. That's the best way to define it. And some of the natives on these islands found out that if they buried a dead person or a corpse in too shallow, I told you these guys have fantastic smell, and so they would actually go raid the dead human remains out of some of the graves. So they got smart. They decided to bury their deceased in clay rather than sand and pile rocks on top so the lizards actually couldn't get them. And there's quite a bit of prey for these guys on these islands. And we were talking about what they eat. Well, that big mouth is what they used to eat with. And that mouth has about 60 shark-like sharp teeth in it. And they're about an inch long, and they are razor sharp. The other thing, if you look at that mouth, realize that they have a mild venom. So when they bite something, that venom is transferred to whatever they intend to try to kill. And that venom, if they bite something, actually accelerates the bleeding of that animal, which then eventually helps take them down. The amount of food that these guys eat, they only eat about once a month. So they don't eat a lot, and if they do take something down, there's kind of a pecking order. If there's other Komodo dragons around, the largest and biggest Komodo is the one that gets to eat first. Let's talk a little more about propagation, how these guys actually mate and have their young. And this is a young Komodo dragon. And the reason I'm mentioning, well, this, these guys are cannibals, those big guys, right? So keep that in mind, but the mama Komodo dragon will usually put maybe 30 to 50 eggs in a nest. And it takes them about 8 months to hatch. But when these guys hatch, they're on their own. The American alligator, the mother alligator, really guards the babies until they were several months old. But not in this case. Those babies are on their own. And I mentioned that they're cannibals, right? So you saw on one of the pictures that these Komodo dragons have claws, pretty good sized claws. So these young Komodos really head for the trees. And the big guys can't climb the trees. So that's one way that they actually protect themselves. But about 10% of what a large Komodo dragon eats are other Komodo dragons. These Komodo dragons can live to be 30 years old. So they can actually be around a long, long time. But one thing that really interests me about Komodo dragons, and there's a few other lizards that do the same, it's called parthenogenesis. And what that means is that the female Komodo dragon doesn't always need a male to have her eggs fertilized and have young. So let's say a female Komodo dragon swims off to a remote island. She can actually lay eggs and raise young, but by parthenogenesis, all the babies are males. So the population then is grown by virtue of the fact that when those baby males grow up, they can mate with the mother, in which case then the mother lays eggs that become both females and males. So with that, we look forward to seeing you in our next adventure.